Welcome back, ladies and gents. Today we are discussing another order flow trade that we took on a live stream from a prior session. As of right now, I'm just playing it live, letting it roll through while we're going to talk over it. I'm kind of discussing, someone was asking me overall what I look to trade, and I look at what concepts I look for, my entry triggers. So you can see I'm right there, I'm adjusting, kind of creating a physical, a drawing, illustration of the trade setups that I look for. In terms of a candlestick perspective, there's a few other layers that are involved, which in today's session, we happen to catch one of those about an hour after this live stream starts. So it's going to be pretty fun. We're going to see today, we're going to be discussing trap traders. The way we're going to be seeing those, we'll be using the DOM as one reference, right? These are the different DOMs. If you're new to the channel, welcome. This is order flow trading here. We're discussing how to utilize the tape and using the context that's inside these tapes, all these little numbers you see here, to find opportunity on trap sellers at the low end of a trade or trap buyers at the top end of a range. So in this session, we actually end up capturing both trades. We get a short in on the NASDAQ for about 70 points, top to bottom on some trap sellers that show up on the tape. I'll be kind of going over that as well in the beginning. And then near the end of the video, we're going to be discussing trap sellers near the low end of the range that show up around here on the S&P about an hour into that trading session. So we're going to get both setups all in one session. This is not typical. This does not happen every single day, but this given session, I was able to capitalize on both scenarios. So let's go ahead and dive in. So real quick, I said trap sellers at the top end. I meant trap buyers. So just for clarification, I find trap buyers on the tape on specifically the S&P tape. And I'm going to go dive in and give you a little bit of background how I find that. First and foremost, it's always locality, right? Where are we trading and who are the most vulnerable participants to take advantage of when we are at a certain location? So for trap sellers, that would be near the low end of any given range. So if we have a range given, a very obvious range, the next thing would be is there trap sellers, right? And I want to give context on how to find trap sellers using these DOMs. But we first must understand where trap sellers are found, okay? And then the same concept is for trap buyers. Where would trap buyers be, right? Think of yourself as an opening range trader, right? Waiting for those first 30 minutes range to apply. And then you're like breakout buy above the 30-minute orb, short sell below the 30-minute orb. Well, odds are you're that sucker getting stuck at the top or bottom trying to trade that opening orb, only to get trapped and sold off into. And I take advantage of traders like that by utilizing the tape, looking at the delta, the behavior of the tape as we approach those extremes, and I fade each and every one of you that take that trade. So without further ado, now that we understand locality, let's dive into actually getting a little bit of an x-ray view into how to identify those trap traders. Now, as we begin this video, there's going to be a few columns we're looking at. Now, if you're new to a DOM, we're only going to be focusing on one of the aspects of the tape primarily. There's a secondary avenue that we're going to be focusing on, but first we must understand that in order to properly identify trap participants, we must understand that we find them at certain areas of interest. So we're going to be focusing on as we trade above a value area high. Now, what is a value area high? Make sure you understand that context. This is a volume profile here we have, right? So this is a distribution of price as it forms in a bell curve. If you don't know what a bell curve distribution is, make sure you watch another video. I think I have one based on the bell curve distribution of price. Essentially, this is an auction. The most volume that trades is always a center point where we're always looking for trap participants will always be at a value area high where the low volume nodes are, or a value area low where the low volume is as well. And then the centerpiece of this volume profile is always going to be the choppiest, the messiest area where price participants are, most of them are transacting. And I actually avoid trading this general zone like the plague. So as we approach the proximity at the value area high, we're near the opening of that live stream here. I'm going to fast forward as we approach this general vicinity here, because that is the first trade that we identify for trap buyers. Now, the second segment of this is the delta. So this here on the little column is our delta. It is essentially all the transactions that are getting filled across, all right, from top to bottom. I'm sorry, bottom to top. And if they're blue, it essentially means that's how many contracts were exchanged at this specific tick value that were more or less at that specific price. So if they're blue, it means they're positive. That means there was 9 more buy contracts aggressively hitting the market than there was sell orders. Now, whether that be executed through limit orders passively, if it's a positive number, they're market buy orders. That means that there was an aggressive amount of buying taking place at that specific area. And it's never going to matter about one specific lot size that is positive. You need to have a cluster of buy orders that are taking place at a specific area. So as we're approaching here, you can see that we're having a cluster of buy that is forming, right? We have about 2 points of buy side that is taking place. That draws my attention because we're inching closer and closer to a value area high, right? This volume profile structure, we're approaching the top end, the lowest volume node point of it. The second thing that I want to see is, because these assets are correlated, this is the S&P 500, this is the NASDAQ, these two assets, I'd like to see this same amount of prints, the same amount of delta that is happening at the top end of a range occur as well simultaneously with the NASDAQ. If I can get both of those to simultaneously pop up, I have a higher quality trade for trap participants, because odds are that it's not just trap buyers showing up on the S&P, but also on the correlating asset, the NASDAQ. And if we can have both of those trap participants at the same time, that lines up for a higher quality trade setup to fade those buyers and essentially trade from one end of the range to the next. So that target would be shorting here against those trap participants, and then filling or taking your profits at the low end of the range. And you're essentially trading the extremes, banking on the fact that we're going to trade from one edge to the next edge of the volume profile. And that's exactly what ends up happening in this trade. So as we start approaching this area, I hope you guys are getting the context of what I'm looking for during this live stream session. And if you guys are interested in watching the actual live stream, I will put it in the description below. This is me. I execute the trade in live, in the real time. I comment over it. I give the idea as it's happening. So there's no hindsight trade involved here. This is all happening with real people on my live stream on YouTube. I stream 2 days a week for free, and then the rest private on Discord. So feel free to look at the description for that. As we're pressing higher, the second thing that I love to see is to see aggressive price action. What I mean by aggressive price action is the DOM here. You can see that the orders, as we've approached these highs, if you can't see it now, this takes experience and hours of watching these DOMs. They're moving rather rapidly and very accelerated, as you can see, selling off aggressively, right? After I see that one failure, it gives me validation that, okay, there's some aggressive participants pushing price above. So these tapes are aggressively pushing up. And as price deviates from this high, it is falling rather quickly, letting me know that the participants at the top end of these extremes are also weak hands, meaning they don't have the sustainability to hold price as price is going higher. On any slips, it falls rather quickly. So we're going to watch this tape kind of play out some more. As you can see, there are more buy deltas approaching, even more buy delta, and we're getting closer and closer to that pre-market high that we had posted prior to PPI news. That was a day-to-day. As this is happening, again, my eyes are glued to the S&P and the NASDAQ. The center one is going to be the Dow Jones. I have all three DOMs open, as they're all correlated assets. All right, so I sped it up a little bit, and we're getting closer and closer to that point. You can kind of see that the buy side is accelerating rather aggressively. We're getting more and more buy delta. It's starting to become just only buy orders as we're approaching this value area high. And I'm going to stay quiet for a little bit until we see more and more of this. The repetitiveness of this action is really what's going to help any trader who's attempting to learn the DOM. That's going to really help become second nature when trying to find those setups. I can make one video about it, and maybe you can go on your day and try to find this setup yet again. It doesn't happen every single day. It is something that you are able to spot after hours and hours and hours of watching the same setup occur within the market. And this just comes off the back of experience of hours of watching this. So even if you watch this one time, odds are you may need to watch it about 5 to 10 times to really understand what you're looking for. So I'm going to just stay quiet here. We're going to watch. Okay, at this point, what I'm actually seeing here is you can see that they're attempting to push past 905 and around 100 on the NASDAQ simultaneously, and they're both unable to really pop above. You can see that they're very, very slowly able to push up. The aggressiveness to the upside is now subsiding substantially. I assume I'm going to be shorting soon because based on just what I'm watching back right now, from hours of watching this tape, I can see that they're trying to reach higher prices and they're finishing the auction on the NASDAQ in two ticks above, and it's failing to do so. The tape of this up on the upside push is getting weaker and weaker. And I can tell that I'm probably going to at some point start to short this because I can already tell that this tape is getting really weak on these pushes up. They're no longer as aggressive as they were when this video first started. So I think this is the final push here that's going to come into play. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to start to hover over to short this shortly. The other thing I'm noticing is they're finishing the auction. What finishing the auction means is on the buy side, the last number that prints right there, that 5, that is a finished auction. I'm gonna give it a second. It's starting here. I should have shorted it sooner in hindsight, but this is the setup right here. I should be shorting it soon. You're going to see me hover over this DOM right here shortly, and you're going to see me enter a trade. Because based on this, you can see that the auction keeps finishing, meaning this last buy order on this side of the tape, the blue, keeps finishing right here. The auction, every time we push up, the auction keeps finishing right there again, right there. That last blue rectangle, it keeps finishing in the same spot. And that's telling me there's weakness. There's potentially no one willing to buy above the last buyer. And every time we finish the auction, there's always about 5 lots, 2 lots, 3 lots, 3 contracts trading. It's very small volume. It's not big size, willing to push price higher. So I think this is the short spot at this point. You can see the NASDAQ's doing the same thing, reaching, finishing the auction as well. If you have any questions on finishing the auction and things like that, or any questions for that matter, feel free to drop them in the description or in the comment section. What I'm discussing here are, I wouldn't say high level things, but they're things that you must understand. There's a short entry right there on the NASDAQ, stop loss at the high. The idea here is that if the buyers do fail, they should not be rewarded with any more new highs. And if any new high is made, then the theory or the idea is no longer valid because the buyers are being rewarded with a new high of day. So I'm targeting the low end of the curve. You can see my take profit is the low. This is my entry. This is kind of 93 is where I shorted. I should have or shorted sooner now that I'm looking at it. But nonetheless, we're going to let this thing play out. You can see that this is going to follow by a bunch of net selling taking place. Immediately drops. You can see the tape is picking up to the downside. Now the sellers are just cascading orders. All the delta is hitting sell, 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 sell. And that is a combination of a lot of things. Some people might think that's just straight sellers, but it actually is going to be a mixture of sell orders hitting the tape aggressively, as well as buyers capitulating, because those stop losses are going to start hitting. Anybody who was buying near this value area high is now going to be capitulating, and their stop loss becomes a market sell order. You can see sell side's accelerating. My take profits are on here. I do end up managing one of them off right here at 51 as we approach that low end of that value. At that point, it's up 40 points within a matter of less than a minute. So I lock in gains quickly. Because what I don't like to see is sellers or a sell side come in rather quickly, because the reversal can happen rather fast as well. I like to see a trickle down most times with a capitulation near the tail end of it. But now we're about halfway through the value area, the balance of this profile. And around here is where I start to cover the last of it, when the NASDAQ hits a new low. We have essentially hit a new low, and that's where I cover my last contract. So for now, I'm up about 40 points on this from 50 points at this point, given I shorted at 93. The NASDAQ's trading at 43, give or take. You can tell I'm in a position because this is the net P&L on the left side of the column. You can see buyers are trying to overtake, which is why I wanted to cover at 50s, because when we have a sharp sell, usually there's a sharp reversal thereafter. And I want to make sure that I'm covering some profit along the way, because I don't like to see sell side come in that aggressive so early on. At this point, you can see that the buyers are trying to push higher, and they're stalling out. Right at 76, they stalled. The pace of this tape completely died down. We picked up at 50s, pushed above for 20 points, and now they're inching higher, trying to push out, and they're unable to. You can see the weakness. You can see how, as they're pushing up, they're starting to dwindle down, right? The tape is starting to slow down. The aggressiveness is starting to stall right at the 70. If you play this over and over and over, you will see that the amount of aggressiveness that came in at the 40s, 50s, on the way up to the 70s has completely come to a halt. That gives me confidence to hold the trade. No reason to cover the short, because you can see that they keep finishing the auction right at the 73. And as the trade's going on, I'm saying I'm making notes here of what I want to see next for the bear thesis to begin. I'm saying acceptance below is bear, below this area. And this trade ends up being a long after it sells off. So you're going to see me flip long because I identify what at first may not seem like trap sellers, which then ends up being trap sellers as the trade plays out. And I'm going to explain that as well. So in this one day, within the first hour of the open, I identify trap buyers at the top end. I take the short. I get about 100 points on the last NASDAQ contract. I think I cover it at 20K 11. And then I end up getting a long trade on the S&P for about 20 points based on the trap sellers that I found on the DOM, which I will be discussing in this same video. So make sure you stick around. So you can see here that the another thing that's important is as we stalled there, you also saw a lot of net buying, right? So even those fresh buyers above 70s, now those are trapped. So that means there's more stop losses that can trigger if this fails, right? So I'm drawing context from the DOM as price is trading. As buyers try to push back up into those highs and they are not rewarded with new fresh highs, then the inventory that's going long here, the dip buyers at the 50s, they're essentially now trapped, right? This last push that we had from 50 to about 70, those fresh buyers that are coming in, they are no longer they're not being rewarded with more than 20 points, max about 79, 80. So then that means we have further downside. And once we get the next leg of capitulation, which you will see on the DOM pick up, that is where I start to cover my final set on this short contract that I have open on the NASDAQ. You can see there's rather just a balanced price action right at the point of control. No longer buyers getting aggressive, sellers getting aggressive. It's just balanced. But because we have a sell capitulation from the high end of the range, my assumption is we sell lower as long as fresh buyers do not get rewarded. So as this action is picked up, you can see the tape is now rather balanced, no longer any aggressors on any given side. They're now finishing the auction at the low end. 0 right there. Keep finishing the auction there down. Means buyers are trying to hold price up. As you're watching this video, thank you for watching the video. If you have questions on things that I'm discussing in this, please feel free to drop a comment. I will make a video on whatever that may be if you need further clarification on this particular setup. Then now there's more sellers participating, and you can see that there's buyers are capitulating, accelerating the downside. The S&P has now a cluster of net selling right here. Cluster of net selling taking place, breaking the current day low. Right? This was the low at the time, 92. Below that, a bunch of selling, which my assumption is at this time, given the context of the move down, is stop losses getting triggered. Because we're not near value area low yet, right? It's not until we hit this around this area that I start to flip long on the S&P. On this one, you're going to see me buy. Here it is. We start selling off, more capitulation. And then buyers trying to pick up on the low end day. They essentially get absorbed right around the low end right here, right before the prior low, 93, and they get slapped below. You can see that sellers are willing to hold price below the low of day. As buyers pushed up, we now came lower and then they slapped them, right? They hit them hard. At this point, we're looking at a low of day. I'm hovering my mouse, debating whether I should take profit here. Because I still see the weakness here at the low end with buyers trying to push up and failing to do so, I wait a little bit until I see that final leg of capitulation, at which point I take profit around this point right here. Right as we trade into this low end, I take profit around this 11 area because I'm aware that buyers are trying to step in and they've now poly capitulated all these fresh longs. And there it is. I drag my take profit above, close it out. That's a nice NASDAQ trade right there. Almost 100 points in a matter of a few minutes on that trap buyers trade. And the next thing I'm focusing on is, okay, we're approaching the value area low. I clear the delta, and you see this finally becomes zero because I want to get a fresh, clean slate as to what's potentially can happen here as we trade the low end of the day of this current session. We're trading at a value area low, coming off a value area high, and I'm waiting to see if the data coming through the DOM is indicative that a reversal is possible. As you can see here, buyers try to pick up right at 84. So I make a note of that at some point, that there's buying here. You can see that there's trying to push up and they keep getting absorbed, right? Price is steadily rising, not aggressively, because there's sellers potentially trying to hold price below, buy delta coming in, more buy delta coming in, and I'm over here drawing essentially what I'm looking to happen, right? I'm drawing an illustration of what I'm looking for, sharing with the viewers what kind of setups I'm looking for at this low end. So now as we're trading down here, let's highlight the value area low, and we're essentially looking for opportunity down here. And I can see that there's clearly buy side coming in here, trying to push price above. You can see that. The momentum's shifting now to the upside. And you always want to be patient with these setups. You never want to rush yourself into buying. You want to make sure you have enough data that the market is giving you to validate that they can reverse. You don't have to buy it right away on an impulse. You can see the buy side is obviously very aggressive here. I'm highlighting the delta with my mouse. I'm letting the market tell me what levels are going to be important if a reversal does come into play. And at this time, I can see that right at 91, that is where we got rejection, and then sellers step right back in. And there comes the sell side again. So at this point, what I want to see now is a cluster of net selling. In the same way we saw a cluster of net buying at the top end of the range, I am now focused on this DOM because this is where the cleaner net selling is showing up. So I'm going to be focusing on all the delta that's populating on this DOM, alongside the pace of this tape 2, kind of gathering how strong the sell or buy side is at this low of day. I keep clearing the delta because I want to make sure I have the clearest view of all the action that's happening down here. Because when it's an area of opportunity, I want to make sure I'm getting the freshest orders that are being executed at the market. And I don't want to be guessing whether the buyers have stepped in or the sellers have stepped in the last minute or so, or the last few seconds. I want to make sure I'm getting the freshest orders that are possible, that are executing at the market at this price. And the other thing that's important to me is that we're trading at yesterday's high, right? If there's ever a situation where they want to trap sellers, it's always going to be at a prior day low of day, a daily low, or a prior daily high. And it's perfect because these two are lined up right at their prior day highs. And that is the perfect place to trap sellers at significant lows or highs on a higher time frame. So as we approach here, we're seeing even more net selling. So patience is obviously very important here. Letting them show their hand and seeing how much sellers can push past this high. You can see they finished the auction right there twice. And that is of interest to me. When I see that kind of action on the tape that we just witnessed, where they kind of swept this high right by 2 ticks, I buy right away. That kind of action intrigues me because you don't see that kind of set up that kind of action on the DOM very often, where they sweep the low by 2 ticks and immediately pop it back up. So at that point, I get long. I do endure some drawdown on this because I'm waiting and being more patient. They swept the low again right there for only 15 contracts and 14 contracts. This gets me interested because they're finishing the auction with very low volume at the low end, which tells me that they're running out of sellers here, right? The cluster of selling is picking up. We're now getting triple digit sells back to back to back over the course of a few points in the similar fashion that we saw a lot of buy orders hitting the tape on the top end of the range. And here's more selling, more selling. They finish the auction and they keep pressing and pressing and pressing. Now this is perfect because now I have context. I only have small size, 2 micros. I'm going to let this thing kind of run its course. And as we're seeing all this selling, that's either a lot of stop losses or a ton of sellers or a mixture of both. I'm not sure, right? I'm going to let the price dictate what it is eventually. So as price starts to kind of show its hand, right? You see buyers trying to step in here. After all this selling takes place, I'm letting the buyers show their hand and the sellers essentially get squeezed out before I initiate a more buying on this position. I like to feel out the position first. And as the price starts to validate my thesis that the sellers are getting stuck, I start to add to the position. And there's something about me having exposure, like skin in the game when it comes to in a trade, that gives me a clear view of the action that's happening. So it's another reason I like to add small. As you can see here, the pace is picking up to the buy side. I can see that buyers are attempting to push away, but they're kind of stuck. You can kind of tell there's a war going on here. They're fidgeting up and down, right? It's kind of like this at the DOM. So there's a lot of indecision at this area, right? Yesterday's high. There's still a lot of sellers taking place, taking control here of price, trying to hold it below yesterday's high. I'm highlighting with my mouse there how significant this amount of selling that is taking place at the low end is. And if that selling is indeed net sellers at the low end of the market, then this is going to potentially squeeze out pretty hard. And at some point, someone asked me, what do you mean net sellers? Aren't they passive buyers? And I bring down the control panel here. I think this is now. Here we go. And I'm explaining to them that they're hitting the market sell orders. And that's the only way that those delta numbers are going to be populating as negative delta, because someone has to be hitting the market sell order in order for those numbers to populate. And as you can see, we're trying to still battle within yesterday's high, pushing back above. At some point, you're going to start to see this net delta flip positive. And at that point, I start to buy more. Because at that point, we're at the low of day. We're getting buy side pushes. We're holding yesterday's high. And once the delta flips positive, I bought more right there at 86. That's enough validation for me that the bulls can at the very least trade back at the balance of range, right? I know for sure at this point, once that happens, there's a 60-70% chance that they're going to be trading right at the zone, and that's where I'm going to take profit. Because I know they're going to balance the book back up and squeeze out all these sellers. You can see they're still balancing now. They're squeezing out. The aggressiveness of this tape is now shifting to the upside, and the sell side is getting a little weaker and weaker. I'm highlighting this on the live stream, explaining as the delta is weaning off from the selling, it's now turning into buying, some passive selling in between, or some market selling in between, but it's now more net buying. There is net selling above all this selling that took place at the low of day. And there is a squeeze, NASDAQ also picking up as well. And then you're going to see me put in some sell orders at select prices. And I'm always going to put them where the selling first started. So the first selling became at 92. If you guys remember during this commentary, I said we pushed up to about 93, and then we began to stall out and sell off again on the NASDAQ, on the S&P. So that's where I'm going to be locking in some profit in the event that the aggressive sellers are still there at the tape at the 93s, 92s. So you're going to see me put a sell order right now to close some of my position right there, 92. Because I understand that sellers, that is where they first started selling this market. So I never know how long the squeeze will last, right? As we're approaching this balance area. So I let price do its thing. It's pushing up. You can clearly see the buy side is now kicked in, squeezing, boom, blocked in some profit there. Stop at the low of day, because in theory, if these buyers are going to take control, we shouldn't trade lower than the low of day. And I have to leave the trade enough room to breathe to allow the buyers to defend the low of day. And the next area, I put a reclaim note there, 98. That was the point of control in the morning. It's shifted since then to 95. So I'm kind of walking over, explaining on the live stream the whole philosophy of the net selling and what it could have been and what it was. And now it looks a little clearer. You can see there's still more buying. It's now stalling out just a tad, but this is not bearish at all. Because price stalling at a prior resistance is more bullish than bearish. Because if the sellers are still stuck, which my assumption is, they should squeeze out another 6 points. Again, we're long from 85 average. So at this point, we're up about 7 points. It squeezes to 98, giving me about 13-point trade. I end up taking most of it off by 905, which is about 20 points to the upside. Just fabulous on the S&P. So I want you guys, as you watch this video, kind of feel the flow of the orders on the DOM. We've seen sellers take control, buyers capitulate, sellers get stuck at the low end. Sellers try to battle for and scath for strength to hold price below a prior day low, a prior day high. And then the buyers take control, delta flips, and momentum just squeezes to the upside. And now we're balanced again. And all we can do now at this point is allow the flow of orders, the participants who moved us away from the low end of the auction, do their work. And you can see right at the same zone, 93, 90, 92, that's exactly where we're fading out. That's exactly why I take profit at these zones. The delta is now balanced. You can see right at the 92, where I have my note from before. There's a mixture between buying and selling taking place at the market. Get some whips down, buyers defending that. More buying taking place above the prior high. Sellers try to snap that back. Buyers hold it. And you can see the buying still remains. There's no one selling, and they're squeezing. That's what a lot of these pushes are from just short squeezes coming in. A short squeeze essentially is taking stop orders from net sellers. And I'm just sitting there with the limit order waiting at 98 patiently. Now we're about halfway through that volume area. About to hit my take profit on the second lot. Boom, done. At this point, I have about 10% left of the position. And price is still squeezing. And you're going to see just price accelerate to the end and essentially come back to the same spot where all this started again. Working through the entire auction process. Right? We worked our way from value area high, which was where we got short. We covered at the value area low, specifically on the NASDAQ. We flipped long after we saw that net selling. We allowed the buyers to take control. We added more to the position. We scaled out along the way as buyers reclaimed and clawed back and squeezed out sellers. And now we're just waiting for this high of day to trade again with any more contracts that I have left to scale there. And at that point, if I want to buy more, my cost basis is so cheap that if buyers break out at this high of day and form acceptance above, I have the ability to add to the position and maximize my returns based on my low cost basis that I was able to get in on. So at this point, I'm hands off. I don't have any stress. I don't have any worry. I allow the buyers to do their job, and you can see they're continuing to squeeze higher and higher. And at some point, we get a major squeeze, and I always like to cover into that because those major squeezes like that are always the end of a move up before we consolidate and begin to kind of digest price. So as you can saw, that as aggressive push. That to me is probably all the net sellers that were stuck here at the low end of this range. Most of those got squeezed out on this last end of this push. So at that point, I'm kind of hesitant on the stream about holding my position. I'm more inclined to want to sell another contract because I do have 2 left. And so at some point, I'm sure I hover over and I start to sell some more and just hold 1 more contract to the end of this. At this point, we're going to speed this up a little bit and just recap the whole thing. Because at this point, there's not much else to cover. We saw everything started on both sides of the trade. The sell side that brought us lower, the buy side that brought us higher. There's nothing else to cover in this video besides rewatch, ingrain in your mind the setup, learn, review, and master. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section. I'm happy to make any more videos on these specific setups, anything to do with the DOM. I hope you guys gathered some value from this. I do stream live 2 days a week on YouTube. If you guys want to get more one-on-one on the 3 days of the week that I'm also live to get more validation on these setups, I do it privately on Discord. First time, you see the information in the description below. I'm just going to let the tape roll through and let this thing kind of play out.